We still have 5 minutes. Maybe, you know what we should do is probably read couple of paragraph from Hidden Words. As you know, Baha'u'llah revealed the hidden words, which is the essence of all religions, actually. It's quite interesting. It's a small booklet, and if you read it, you'll see the attributes of God explained in every manifestations that you can imagine. So it's a concentration of all attributes of God and application of those within our own lives. So maybe someone wants to read one of them. So the key really relates to this hidden words of Good morning. Okay. Just okay. Read it. Just read one. Doesn't matter.
O Son of Spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. O Son of Spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom, if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily justice is my gift to thee, and a sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes.
So you want to? No, just tell me, elaborate. What did you learn from that?
Okay, just that. Well, it's very important because he's saying here that justice is the most important. Fairness, using your own, not doing what your neighbor says is, not listening to what your neighbor is saying is just, but using your own knowledge and your own background to understand what is true justice. Don't go with the crowd.
My understanding is if you just look at the problem in a minor way, just using the essence of that subject.
You have the Persian one?
I have both.
That's good.
Yeah, this was from the Arabic. I also have it from the Persian.
No, the key here is what is just. You see, that's the whole problem. If you rely on somebody else, right, that means that you're given your right to decide. Bless you. So the justice comes in when you know the truth and you choose, not somebody else choosing for you. So this is very important aspects about knowledge, acquiring knowledge directly, not through somebody else. Because you're susceptible to accept their position, not yours.
Don't accept what your neighbor says. You
That's
go
right.
through your own understanding, your own knowledge.
So reality is, and this is the whole equilibrium, which they mention that all human, regardless of how much knowledge you have, you're understanding is subjective, is not objective. So for you to know what the objective is, because there is only one truth. You can't have different version of reality. So there is one truth. The question is, if all of us are looking at a particular reality and comprehend it differently, what happens is that you have to rely on somebody else to translate it for you.
A lot of it, though, also has to do with what your background is. And if you are raised, I'm thinking of what's happening today.
The assumption, that's correct.
Yeah, you are raised in thought and brought up into one segment, and then another segment comes along and you go, oh, you know, but this is the way I was raised. The input into the children makes a lot of difference too, you know, and their idea of what is truth comes a lot from their parents, from where they live,
Assumptions,
and
right.
so forth. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, please.
I think if you see the things through your own eyes, rather than seeing it through other people's eyes, you get rid of the imitation. Because
Of course.
there are, you know, in Islam, a person who is TABRIZ, everybody has to copy what he says. You know, these particular hidden words remind us that we have to get away from imitation.
So this is really excellent point where really this describes the class of clergy is actually abolished. So this really describes that you can't rely on another human being to translate it for you. You have to do it yourself. So this issue of relinquishing your responsibilities to somebody else because your priest or your clergy has said so, therefore he's responsible with the outcome, completely goes away. So here you have accountability for every action you perform, regardless of whether you knew what you were doing or not. So this is accountability that comes into religion, which really it's a very completely new concept in general. So it's independent investigation of truth. Okay, we can start reading. Any other comments, questions? No? Okay.
Well, just on that one hidden word specifically, One thing I think is important to note is that we're talking about God. So the greatest thing in God's eyes is justice. Mm-hmm. And so we are created in God's image. So as humans, that means that inherently we have the spiritual nature to view justice with just as much esteem as God does. And so what that means for us, and you know, it's very clear throughout the Dawnbreakers, is that the opposite of that, injustice, is something that it has a deep effect on us as humans. When we witness injustice, it hurts us deeply, and it really creates this need in all of us to fight injustice and strive for true justice.
Exactly. The first segment, which was quite interesting, it says pure and radiant heart, because that's the only way you can absorb the truth. There's no alternative to that. If you have an ulterior motive to project your idea on top of the truth, you will never find it. So and another segment which was interesting, you read the next paragraph, which actually describes that only the positive aspects of your life would impact your being in the other world. So if you don't have those positive actions, you would be left with nothing. So you can't really carry negative stuff. This is very interesting, actually. So when you read them, and imagine, and this is the essence of the spirituality of all religions. In this booklet, which, how many verses are there in the hidden words? There's about hundreds, huh? Between Arabic and... Yeah. But it's quite interesting. So when you're looking at discoveries, material discoveries, right? Material discoveries, people spend 71 in the Arabic. Yeah, there is similar probably in Farsi side too. So it's about 140, 150 of them. Now, and this was revealed in Soleimania in mountains of Kermanshah. So it was quite interesting. In a short period of time, this was revealed. And when you're looking at these sentences, people in, let's say, different sciences, even social sciences, they spend the entire life and to find one formula. So you look at someone, so it's really, you need someone really beyond the human capacity to be able to reveal these truths in general. Okay.
The Bab was accordingly ordered to proceed to Tabriz. The same escort, under the command of Muhammad Beg, attended him on his journey to the northwestern province of Azerbaijan. He was allowed to select one companion and one attendant from among his followers to be with him during his sojourn in that province. He selected Sayyid Hussein Yazdi and Sayyid Hassan, his brother. He refused to expend on himself the funds provided by the government for the expense of that journey. All the allowances that were given by the state he bestowed upon the poor and needy, and devoted to his own private needs the money which he, as a merchant, had earned in Bushir and Shiraz. As orders had been given to avoid entering the towns in the course of the journey to Tabriz, a number of the believers of Qazvin, informed of the approach of their beloved leader, set out for the village of Siyad-Dihan, and were there able to meet him. One of them was Mullah Iskandar, who had been delegated by Hujat to visit the Bab in Shiraz and to investigate his cause. The Bab commissioned him to deliver the following message to Suleiman Khan-i-Afshar, who was a great admirer of the late Sayyid Kazim. He whose virtues the late Sayyid unceasingly extolled, and to the approach of whose revelation he continually alluded, is now revealed. I am that promised one. Arise and deliver me from the hand of the oppressor. When the Bab entrusted this message to Mullah Iskandar, Suleiman Khan was in Zanjan and was preparing to leave for Tehran. Within the space of 3 days that message reached him. He failed, however, to respond to that appeal. 2 days later, a friend of Mullah Iskandar had acquainted Hujat, who, at the instigation of the ulamas of Zanjan, had been incarcerated in the capital with the appeal of the Bab. Hujat immediately instructed the believers of his native city to undertake whatever preparations were required and to collect the necessary forces to achieve the deliverance of their master. He urged them to proceed with caution and to attempt at an appropriate moment to seize and carry him away to whatever place he might desire. These were shortly joined by a number of believers from Qazvin and Tehran, who set out according to the directions of Hujat to execute the plan. They overtook the guards at the hour of midnight, and finding them fast asleep, approached the Bab and begged him to flee. The mountains of Azerbaijan too have their claims, was his confident reply as he lovingly advised them to abandon their project and return to their homes. Approaching the gate of Tabriz, Muhammad Beg, feeling that the hour of his separation from his prisoner was at hand, besought his presence and with tearful eyes begged him to overlook his shortcomings and transgressions. The journey from Isfahan, he said, has been long and arduous. I have failed to do my duty and serve you as I ought. I crave your forgiveness and pray you to vouchsafe me your blessings. Be assured, the Bab replied, I account you a member of my fold. They who embrace my cause will eternally bless and glorify you, will extol your conduct and exalt your name. The rest of the guards followed the example of their chief, implored the blessings of their prisoner, kissed his feet, and with tears in their eyes bade him a last farewell. To each the Bab expressed his appreciation of his devoted attentions and assured him of his prayers in his behalf. Reluctantly they delivered him into the hands of the governor of Tabriz, the heir to the throne of Muhammad Shah. To those with whom they were subsequently brought in contact, these devoted attendants of the Bab and eyewitnesses of his superhuman wisdom and power recounted with awe and admiration the tale of those wonders which they had seen and heard, and by this means helped to diffuse in their own way the knowledge of the new revelation. The news of the approaching arrival of the Bab at Tabriz bestirred the believers in that city. They all set out to meet him, eager to extend to so beloved a leader their welcome. The officials of the government, into whose custody the Bab was to be delivered, refused to allow them to draw near and to receive his blessings. One youth, however, unable to restrain himself, rushed forth barefooted to the gate of the city, and, in his impatience to gaze upon the face of his beloved, ran out a distance of half a farsang towards him. As he approached the horsemen, who were marching in advance of the Bab, he joyously welcomed them, and seizing the hem of the garment of one among them, devoutly kissed his stirrups. "Ye are the companions of my well-beloved," he tearfully exclaimed. "I cherish you as the apple of my eye." His extraordinary behavior, the intensity of his emotion, amazed them. They immediately granted him his request to attain the presence of his master. As soon as his eyes fell upon him, a cry of exultation broke from his lips. He fell upon his face and wept profusely. The Bab dismounted from his horse, and put his arms around him, wiped away his tears, and soothed the agitation of his heart. Of all the believers of Tabriz, that youth alone succeeded in offering his homage to the Bab, and in being blessed by the touch of his hand. All the others had perforce to content themselves with a distant glimpse of their beloved, and with that view sought to satisfy their longing. When the Bab arrived at Tabriz, he was conducted to one of the chief houses in that city, which had been reserved for his confinement. A detachment of the Nasiri regiment stood guard at the entrance of his house. With the exception of Syed Hussein and his brother, neither the public nor his followers were allowed to meet him. The same regiment, which had been recruited from among the inhabitants of Khamsi, and upon which special honours had been conferred, was subsequently chosen to discharge the volley that caused his death. The circumstances of his arrival had stirred the people in Tabriz profoundly. A tumultuous concourse of people had gathered to witness his entry into the city. Some were impelled by curiosity, others were earnestly desirous of ascertaining the veracity of the wild reports that were current about him, and still others were moved by their faith and devotion to attain his presence and to assure him of their loyalty. As he walked along the streets, the acclamations of the multitude resounded on every side. The great majority of the people who beheld his face greeted him with a shout of "Allahu Akbar." Others loudly glorified and cheered him. A few invoked upon him the blessings of the Almighty. Others were seen to kiss reverently the dust of his footsteps. Such was the clamour which his arrival had raised that a crier was ordered to warn the populace of the danger that awaited those who ventured to seek his presence. "Whosoever shall make any attempt to approach the Syed Bab," went forth the cry, "or seek to meet him, all his possessions shall forthwith be seized, and he himself condemned to perpetual imprisonment." A brief footnote: Allahu Akbar means God is the most great. On the day after the Bab's arrival, Haji Muhammad Taqi-i Milani, a noted merchant of the city, ventured, together with Haji Ali Asghar, to interview the Bab. They were warned by their friends and well-wishers that by such an attempt they would not only be risking the loss of their possessions, but would also be endangering their lives. They refused, however, to heed such counsels. As they approached the door of the house in which the Bab was confined, they were immediately arrested. Syed Hassan, who at that moment was coming out from the presence of the Bab, instantly intervened. "I am commanded by the Syed Bab," he vehemently protested, "to convey to you this message: suffer these visitors to enter, inasmuch as I myself have invited them to meet me." I have heard Haji Ali Asghar testify to the following. This message immediately silenced the oppressors. We were straightway ushered into his presence. He greeted us with these words: "These miserable wretches who watch at the gate of my house have been destined by me as a protection against the onrush of the multitude who throng around the house. They are powerless to prevent those whom I desire to meet from attaining my presence." For about 2 hours we tarried with him. As he dismissed us, he entrusted me with 2 cornelian ring stones, instructing me to have carved on them the 2 verses which he had previously given to me, to have them mounted and brought to him as soon as they were ready. He assured us that at whatever time we desired to meet him, no one would hinder our admittance to his presence. Several times I ventured to go to him in order to ascertain his wish regarding certain details connected with the commission with which he had entrusted me. Not once did I encounter the slightest opposition on the part of those who were guarding the entrance of his house. Not one offensive word did they utter against me, nor did they seem to expect the slightest remuneration for their indulgence. I recall how, in the course of my association with Mullah Hussain, I was impressed by the many evidences of his perspicacity and extraordinary power. I was privileged to accompany him on his journey from Shiraz to Mashhad, and visited with him the towns of Yazd, Tabriz, Bushrui, and Turbat. I deplored in those days the sadness of my failure to meet the Bab in Shiraz. Grieve not, Mullah Hussain confidently assured me. The Almighty is no doubt able to compensate you in Tabriz for the loss you have sustained in Shiraz. Not once, but 7 times can he enable you to partake of the joy of his presence in return for the one visit which you have missed. I was amazed at the confidence with which he uttered those words. Not until the time of my visit to the Bab in Tabriz, when, despite adverse circumstances, I was on several occasions admitted into his presence, did I recall those words of Mullah Hussain, and marvel at his remarkable foresight. How great was my surprise when, on my 7th visit to the Bab, I heard him speak these words. Praise be to God, who has enabled you to complete the number of your visits, and who has extended to you his loving protection.
Okay, so here, generally, as you see, this is the banishment of Bab from Tehran to Tabriz, and this is where he was under the jurisdiction of the Shah's basically son that supposed to become he was the future king. So that's how they banished him to that area. And of course, this explains even they plotted to rescue him during the way. The Bab'Is, and he did not want to deviate from God's plan. So he sent them back. But the interesting part is that with all those atrocities and precautions that clergy and government was putting around him, he was still in control in terms of even people that were guarding him were under his domain. So he had such a spiritual power that they were helpless in terms of preventing from people coming to see him. So it's just quite interesting. It shows the power of the mind and impact that he had on people around him. So those people that are supposed to prevent people visiting him were actually facilitator, and he would choose which one they would let in. So he was using them as a protector for himself.
Chapter 13, the Bab's incarceration in the castle of MÁH-KÚ. Sayyid Hussain-i Yazdi has been heard to relate the following. During the first 10 days of the Bab's incarceration in Tabriz, no one knew what would next befall him. The wildest conjectures were current in the city. One day I ventured to ask him whether he would continue to remain where he was or would be transferred to still another place. "Have you forgotten," was his immediate reply, "the question you asked me in Isfahan? For a period of no less than 9 months we shall remain confined in the Jabal-i-Basit, from whence we shall be transferred to the Jabal-i-Shadid. Both these places are among the mountains of Kui, and are situated on either side of the town bearing that name. 5 days after the Bab had uttered this prediction, orders were issued to transfer him and me to the castle of MÁH-KÚ and to deliver us into the custody of Ali Khan I MÁH-KÚ. A footnote says of the Jabal-i-Basit, literally the open mountain, allusion to MÁH-KÚ. The numerical value of Jabal-i-Basit is equivalent to that of MÁH-KÚ, and for the Jabal-i-Shadid, literally the grievous mountain, allusion to Chirik. The numerical value of Jabal-i-Shadid is equivalent to that of Chirik. The castle, a solid 4-towered stone edifice, occupies the summit of a mountain at the foot of which lies the town of MÁH-KÚ. The only road that leads from it passes into that town, ending at a gate which adjoins the seat of government and is invariably kept closed. This gate is distinct from that of the castle itself. Situated on the confines of both the Ottoman and Russian empires, this castle has been used, in view of its commanding position and strategic advantages, as a center for reconnoitering purposes. The officer in charge of that station observed, in time of war, the movements of the enemy, surveyed the surrounding regions, and reported to his government such cases of emergency as came under his observation. The castle is bounded on the west by the river Araxes, which marks the frontier between the territory of the Shah and the Russian Empire. To the south extends the territory of the Sultan of Turkey, the frontier town of Bayazid being at a distance of only 4 farsangs from the mountain of MÁH-KÚ. The frontier officer in charge of the castle was a man named Ali Khan. The residents of the town are all Kurds and belong to the Sunni sect of Islam. A footnote here says, "He dwells in a mountain of which the inhabitants could not even pronounce the name Jannat, paradise, which is an Arabic word. How then could they understand its meaning? Imagine then what can happen in the matter of the essential truths." From the Persian Bayan, volume 4, page 14. The Shias, who constitute the vast majority of the inhabitants of Persia, have always been their avowed and bitter enemies. These Kurds particularly abhor the Shiites of the Shia denomination, whom they regard as the spiritual leaders and chief agitators among their opponents. Ali Khan's mother being a Kurd, the son was held in great esteem and was implicitly obeyed by the people of MÁH-KÚ. They regarded him as a member of their own community and placed the utmost confidence in him. Haji Mirza Akazi had deliberately contrived to relegate the Bab to so remote, so inhospitable, and dangerously situated in a corner of the territory of the Shah, with the sole purpose of stemming the tide of his rising influence and of severing every tie that bound him to the body of his disciples throughout the country. Confident that few, if any, would venture to penetrate that wild and turbulent region occupied by so rebellious a people, he fondly imagined that this forced seclusion of his captive from the pursuits and interests of his followers would gradually tend to stifle the movement at its very birth, and would lead to its final extinction. He was soon made to realize, however, that he had gravely mistaken the nature of the revelation of the Bab, and had underrated the force of its influence. The turbulent spirits of this unruly people were soon subdued by the gentle manners of the Bab, and their hearts were softened by the ennobling influence of his love.
Okay, hold on. It's very important here to know the trick this Mirza Aghasi, which was the prime minister of Shah, played. He placed them in an area which were all Sunnis, and as you know, they were against Sayyids. Sayyids were descendants of Muhammad. And of course, Sunnis don't believe in basically inheritance of the spiritual true imams at all. So they don't believe in any of the imams. And of course, Bab was a Sayyid himself, so they thought this is the best place to really put him in. And most of the Sunnis were against Shiites to begin with, and all the followers of Bab were basically Shiites. These are mostly learned Shiite clergy. So he thought that this would be the best place to put him, so anyone that would attempt to to even visit him would face big problems because they were against Shiites. And ironically, it was situated also between Ottoman Empire in the south, this castle, which were all Sunnis too, and were against Iran because the Iranians were Shiites, and up north were Russians, which basically had skirmishes. And at that time, they had actually gobbled up a large portion of Azerbaijan. So they actually annexed the Azerbaijan. Now it's probably part of Russia, or it has its own governance. But it was quite interesting. So this was a place that had, from three sides, there were enemies at each other's throat, and the inhabitants were Sunnis, and this prime minister thought that this is the best place to bury him.
Their pride was humbled by his unexampled modesty, and their unreasoning arrogance mellowed by the wisdom of his words. Such was the fervor which the Bab had enkindled in those hearts, that their first act every morning was to seek a place whence they could catch a glimpse of his face, where they could commune with him and beseech his blessings upon their daily work. In cases of dispute, they would instinctively hasten to that spot, and, with their gaze fixed upon his prison, would invoke his name and adjure one another to declare the truth. Ali Khan several times attempted to induce them to desist from this practice, but found himself powerless to restrain their enthusiasm. He discharged his functions with the utmost severity, and refused to allow any of the avowed disciples of the Bab to reside, even for one night, in the town of MÁH-KÚ. And a footnote here says, "Oh, how great is your blindness, O my children! That which you do believing to please me. And in spite of these verses which prove my being, these verses which flow from my power, the treasure of which is the very being of this personage, the Bab, in spite of these verses which come from his lips, only by my permission, behold that, without any right whatsoever, you have placed him on the summit of a mountain whose inhabitants are not even worthy of mention. Close to him, which is close to me, there is no one except one of the letters of the living of my book. In his hands, which are my hands, there is not even a servant to light the lamp at night. And behold, the men who are upon the earth have been created only for his own existence. It is through his good will that has come all their joy, and they do not give him even a light." Vahid 2, Bab 1. The fruit of the religion of Islam is faith in the manifestation of the Bab, and behold, they imprison him in MÁH-KÚ, Vahid 2, Bab 7. All that belongs to the divinely chosen one is in heaven. This solitary room wherein I am, which has not even a door, is today the greatest of the gardens of paradise, for the tree of truth is planted therein. All the atoms of which it is composed cry out, "In truth there is no other God but God, and there is no other God beside me, the Lord of the universe." Vahid 2, Bab 16. The fruit of this door is that men, seeing that it is permitted to do all that for the bayan, that is, spend so much money, which is only the foreshadowing of him whom God shall make manifest, must realize what should be done for him whom God shall make manifest when he will appear, so that he will be spared what is happening to me on this day. That is to say, that there are throughout the world many Qur'ans worth thousands of tumans, while he who has showered verses, the Bab, is imprisoned on a mountain, in a room built of bricks baked in the sun. And notwithstanding, that room is the arch itself, that is the ninth heaven, the abode of divinity. Let this be an example to the Bayanis, so that they may not act toward him as the believers in the Quran have acted towards me. Vahid 3, Bab 19, from A.L. Nicholas's Syed Ali Muhammad Dit le Bab, pages 365 to 7. All believe in him, and they still have imprisoned him on a mountain. All are made glad in him, and they have abandoned him. No fire is fiercer for those who have acted thus in their very works. Likewise for the believers, no heaven is higher than their own faith. From the Persian Bayan, Volume 1, pages 126-7. For the first 2 weeks, Syed Hussain further related, no one was permitted to visit the Bab. My brother and I alone were admitted into his presence. Syed Hassan would every day, accompanied by one of the guards, descend to the town and purchase our daily necessities. Sheikh Hassan Izanuzi, who had arrived at MÁH-KÚ, spent the nights in a masjid outside the gate of the town. He acted as an intermediary between those of the followers of the Bab who occasionally visited MÁH-KÚ and Syed Hassan, my brother, who would in turn submit the petitions of the believers to their master and would acquaint Sheikh Hassan with his reply. One day the Bab charged my brother to inform Sheikh Hassan that he would himself request Ali Khan to alter his attitude towards the believers who visited MÁH-KÚ and to abandon his severity. Tell him, he added, I will tomorrow instruct the warden to conduct him to this place. I was greatly surprised at such a message. How could the domineering and self-willed Ali Khan, I thought to myself, be induced to relax the severity of his discipline? Early the next day, the gate of the castle being still closed, we were surprised by a sudden knock at the door, knowing full well that orders had been given that no one was to be admitted before the hour of sunrise. We recognized the voice of Ali Khan, who seemed to be expostulating with the guards, one of whom presently came in and informed me that the warden of the castle insisted on being allowed admittance into the presence of the Bab. I conveyed his message and was commanded to usher him at once into his presence. As I was stepping out of the door of his antechamber, I found Ali Khan standing at the threshold in an attitude of complete submission, his face betraying an expression of unusual humility and wonder. His self-assertiveness and pride seemed to have entirely vanished. Humbly and with extreme courtesy, he returned my salute and begged me to allow him to enter the presence of the Bab. I conducted him to the room which my master occupied. His limbs trembled as he followed me. An inner agitation, which he could not conceal, brooded over his face. The Bab arose from his seat and welcomed him. Bowing reverently, Ali Khan approached and flung himself at his feet. "Deliver me," he pleaded, "from my perplexity. I adjure you by the Prophet of God, your illustrious ancestor, to dissipate my doubts, for their weight has well nigh crushed my heart. I was riding through the wilderness and was approaching the gate of the town when, it being the hour of dawn, my eyes suddenly beheld you, standing by the side of the river, engaged in offering your prayer. With outstretched arms and upraised eyes, you were invoking the name of God. I stood still and watched you. I was waiting for you to terminate your devotions, that I might approach and rebuke you for having ventured to leave the castle without my leave. In your communion with God, you seemed so wrapped in worship that you were utterly forgetful of yourself. I quietly approached you. In your state of rapture, you remained wholly unaware of my presence. I was suddenly seized with great fear and recoiled at the thought of awakening you from your ecstasy. I decided to leave you, to proceed to the guards and to reprove them for their negligent conduct. I soon found out, to my amazement, that both the outer and inner gates were closed. They were opened at my request. I was ushered into your presence, and now find you, to my wonder, seated before me. I am utterly confounded. I know not whether my reason has deserted me." The Bab answered and said, "What you have witnessed is true and undeniable. You belittle this revelation, and have contemptuously disdained its author. God the All-Merciful, desiring not to afflict you with his punishment, has willed to reveal to your eyes the truth. By his divine interposition, he has instilled into your heart the love of his chosen one, and caused you to recognize the unconquerable power of his faith." This marvelous experience completely changed the heart of Ali Khan. Those words had calmed his agitation and subdued the fierceness of his animosity. By every means in his power, he determined to atone for his past behavior. "A poor man, Sheikh," he hastily informed the Bab, "is yearning to attain your presence. He lives in a masjid outside the gate of MÁH-KÚ. I pray you that I myself be allowed to bring him to this place, that he may meet you. By this act I hope that my evil deeds may be forgotten, that I may be enabled to wash away the stains of my cruel behavior towards your friends." His request was granted, whereupon he went straightway to Sheikh Hassan-i-Zanussi and conducted him into the presence of his master. Ali Khan set out, within the limits imposed upon him, to provide whatever would tend to alleviate the rigor of the captivity of the Bab. At night, the gate of the castle was still closed. In the daytime, however, those whom the Bab desired to see were allowed to enter his presence, were able to converse with him, and to receive his instructions. As he lay confined within the walls of the castle, he devoted his time to the composition of the Persian Bayan, the most weighty, the most illuminating and comprehensive of all his works. In it he laid down the laws and precepts of his dispensation, plainly and emphatically announced the advent of a subsequent revelation, and persistently urged his followers to seek and find him whom God would make manifest, warning them lest they allow the mysteries and illusions in the Bayan to interfere with their recognition of his cause. I have heard Sheikh Hassan-i-Zanussi bear witness to the following. The voice of the Bab, as he dictated the teachings and principles of his faith, could be clearly heard by those who are dwelling at the foot of the mountains. The melody of his chanting, the rhythmic flow of the verses which streamed from his lips, caught our ears and penetrated into our very souls. Mountain and valley re-echoed the majesty of his voice. Our hearts vibrated in their depths to the appeal of his utterance. There is a footnote. This is the prayer which the Bab himself quotes in the Dalail-i-Sabi as his supplication during the month of his captivity in the castle of MÁH-KÚ. O my God, grant to him, to his descendants, to his family, to his friends, to his subjects, to his relatives, and all the inhabitants of the earth, the light which will clarify their vision and facilitate their task. Grant that they may partake of the noblest works here and hereafter. In truth, nothing is impossible to thee. O my God, give him the power to bring about a revival of thy religion, and give life by him to what thou hast changed in thy book. Manifest through him thy new commandments, so that through him thy religion may blossom again. Put into his hands a new book, pure and holy, that this book may be free from all doubt and uncertainty, and that no one may be able to alter or destroy it. O my God, dispel through thy splendor all darkness, and through his evident power do away with the antiquated laws. By his preeminence ruin those who have not followed the ways of God. Through him destroy all tyrants, put an end through his sword to all discord, annihilate through his justice all forms of oppression, render the rulers obedient to his commandments, subordinate all the empires of the world to his empire. O my God, humble everyone who desires to humble him, destroy all his enemies, deny anyone who denies him, and confuse anyone who spurns the truth, resists his orders, endeavors to darken his light, and blot his name. The Bab then adds these words: repeat these benedictions often, and, if time to recite them all be lacking, do not fail to say at least the last. Be awake on the day of the apparition of him whom God will make manifest, because this prayer has come down from heaven for him, although I hope no sorrow awaits him. I have taught the believers in my religion never to rejoice over the misfortune of anyone. It is possible, therefore, that at the time of the appearance of the Son of Truth no suffering may fall upon him. The Book of the Seven Proofs, translated by A.L.M. Nicholas, pages 64 to 65. The gradual relaxation of the stern discipline imposed upon the Bab encouraged an increasing number of his disciples from the different provinces of Persia to visit him in the castle of MÁH-KÚ. An unceasing stream of eager and devout pilgrims was directed to its gate through the gentleness and leniency of Ali Khan. After a stay of 3 days, they would invariably be dismissed by the Bab, with instructions to return to their respective fields of service and to resume their labors for the consolidation of his faith. Ali Khan himself never failed to pay his respects to the Bab each Friday and to assure him of his unswerving loyalty and devotion. He often presented him with the rarest and choicest fruit available in the neighborhood of MÁH-KÚ, and would continually offer him such delicacies as he thought would prove agreeable to his taste and liking. In this manner the Bab spent the summer and autumn within the walls of that castle. A winter followed by such exceptional severity that even the copper implements were affected by the intensity of the cold. The beginning of that season coincided with the month of Muharram of the year AH 1264, the 9th of December AD 1847 to the 8th of January 1848. The water which the Bab used for his ablutions was of such icy coldness that its drops glistened as they froze upon his face. He would invariably, after the termination of each prayer, summon Sayyid Hussain to his presence, and would request him to read aloud to him a passage from the Murikul Kulub, a work composed by the late Haji Mullah Mihdi, the great-grandfather of Haji Mirza Kamaluddin Inaraki, in which the author extols the virtues, laments the death, and narrates the circumstances of the martyrdom of the Imam Hussain. The recital of those sufferings would provoke intense emotion in the heart of the Bab. His tears would keep flowing as he listened to the tale of the unutterable indignities heaped upon him, and of the agonizing pain which he was made to suffer at the hands of a perfidious enemy. As the circumstances of that tragic life were unfolded before him, the Bab was continually reminded of that still greater tragedy which was destined to signalize the advent of the promised Hussein. To him, those past atrocities were but a symbol which foreshadowed the bitter afflictions which his own beloved Hussein was soon to suffer at the hands of his countrymen. He wept as he pictured in his mind those calamities which he, who was to be made manifest, was predestined to suffer, calamities such as the Imam Hussein, even in the midst of his agonies, was never made to endure. A footnote here says, during his sojourn at MÁH-KÚ, the Bab composed a great number of works, amongst the more important of which may be especially mentioned the Persian Bayan and the 7 Proofs, Dala'il-i-Sabi, both of which contain ample internal evidence of having been written at this period. Indeed, if we may credit a statement made in the Tariq-i-Jadid on the authority of Mirza Abdul Wahhab, the various writings of the Bab current in Tabriz alone amounted in all to not less than 1,000,000 verses. From A Traveller's Narrative, Note L, page 274.
Okay, so here, remember, they were expecting 2 manifestations. One was return of the 12th Imam, which Bab claimed to be that person, and then return of Imam Hussein. So this reference relates to Baha'u'llah, which would be coming after him, and he was explaining here that what kind of atrocities he would be facing after declaring to be return of Imam Hussein.
He's talking about Baha'u'llah.
Right. Right.
In one of his writings revealed in the year AH 1260, the Bab declares the following: "The spirit of prayer which animates my soul is the direct consequence of a dream which I had in the year before the declaration of my mission. In my vision I saw the head of the Imam Hussein, the Sayyidu Shuhada, which was hanging upon a tree. Drops of blood dripped profusely from his lacerated throat. With feelings of unsurpassed delight, I approached that tree and, stretching forth my hands, gathered a few drops of that sacred blood and drank them devoutly. When I awoke, I felt that the Spirit of God had permeated and taken possession of my soul. My heart was thrilled with the joy of his divine presence, and the mysteries of his revelation were unfolded before my eyes in all their glory. No sooner had Muhammad Shah condemned the Bab to captivity amid the mountain fastnesses of Azerbaijan than he became afflicted with a sudden reverse of fortune, such as he had never known before, and which struck at the very foundations of his state. Appalling disaster surprised his forces that were engaging in maintaining internal order throughout the provinces. The standard of rebellion was hoisted in Khorasan, and so great was the consternation provoked by that rising that the projected campaign of the Shah to Herat was immediately abandoned. Haji Mirza Akaz's recklessness and prodigality had fanned into flame the smouldering fires of discontent, had exasperated the masses, and encouraged them to stir up sedition and mischief. The most turbulent elements in Khorasan that inhabited the regions of Kushan, Burjnurd, and Shiravan leagued themselves with the Salah, son of the Asifud-Dawleh, the elder maternal uncle of the Shah and governor of the province, and repudiated the authority of the central government. Whatever forces were dispatched from the capital met with immediate defeat at the hands of the chief instigators of the rebellion. Jafar Kuli Khan in Namdar and Amir Arslan Khan, son of the Salah, who conducted the operations against the forces of the Shah, displayed the utmost cruelty and, having repulsed the attacks of the enemy, mercilessly put their captives to death.
Yeah, this Herat is, I think, is the portion of, it's actually, sorry? Is east, yeah, it's currently in Afghanistan. But the rebellious here, and these, again, there were all skirmishes between the two. And the Shah was sending a troop to quash the rebellion, and of course they got defeated miserably. And so there's a lot of it were instigated by clergy and political ambitions of the prime minister, which again created so many disasters.
Mullah Hussain was at the time residing at Mashhad and was endeavoring, despite the tumult which that revolt had occasioned, to spread the knowledge of the new revelation. No sooner had he discovered that the Salah, in his desire to extend the scope of the rebellion, had determined to approach him and obtain his support, and he promptly decided to leave the city in order to avoid implicating himself in the plots of that proud and rebellious chief. In the dead of night, with only Kambar Ali as his attendant, he proceeded on foot in the direction of Tehran, from which place he was determined to visit Azerbaijan, where he hoped to meet the Bab. His friends, when they learned of the manner of his departure, immediately provided whatever would be conducive to the comforts of his long and arduous journey, and hastened to overtake him. Mullah Hussain declined their help. "I have vowed," he said, "to walk the whole distance that separates me from my beloved. I shall not relax in my resolve until I shall have reached my destination." He even tried to induce Kambar Ali to return to Mashhad, but was finally obliged to yield to his entreaty to allow him to act as his servant throughout his pilgrimage to Azerbaijan. On his way to Tehran, Mullah Hussain was enthusiastically greeted by the believers in the different towns through which he passed. They addressed to him the same request and received from him the same reply. I have heard the following testimony from the lips of Akei-i-Kalim. When Mullah Hussain arrived at Tehran, I, together with a large number of believers, went to visit him. He seemed to us the very embodiment of constancy, of piety and virtue. He inspired us with his rectitude of conduct and passionate loyalty. Such were the force of his character and the ardor of his faith that we felt convinced that he, unaided and alone, would be capable of achieving the triumph of the faith of God. He was, with secrecy, ushered into the presence of Baha'u'llah, and soon after his interview proceeded to Azerbaijan. The night before his arrival at MÁH-KÚ, which was the eve of the 4th Nowruz after the declaration of the mission of the Bab, and which fell in that year, the year AH 1264, AD 1848, on the 13th of the month of Rabi'uth Thani, Ali Khan dreamed a dream. In my sleep, he thus relates his story, I was startled by the sudden intelligence that Muhammad, the Prophet of God, was soon to arrive at MÁH-KÚ, that he was to proceed directly to the castle in order to visit the Bab and to offer him his congratulations on the advent of the Nowruz festival. In my dream I ran out to meet him, eager to extend to so holy a visitor the expression of my humble welcome. In a state of indescribable gladness, I hastened on foot in the direction of the river, and as I reached the bridge, which lay at a distance of a maidan from the town of MÁH-KÚ, I saw two men advancing towards me. I thought one of them to be the Prophet himself, while the other, who walked behind him, I supposed to be one of his distinguished companions. I hastened to throw myself at his feet, and was bending to kiss the hem of his robe, when I suddenly awoke. A great joy had flooded my soul. I felt as if paradise itself, with all its delights, had been crowded into my heart. Convinced of the reality of my vision, I performed my ablutions, offered my prayer, arrayed myself in my richest attire, anointed myself with perfume, and proceeded to the spot where, the night before in my dream, I had gazed upon the countenance of the Prophet. I had instructed my attendants to saddle 3 of my best and swiftest steeds and conduct them immediately to the bridge. The sun had just risen when, alone and unescorted, I walked out of the town of MÁH-KÚ in the direction of the river. As I approached the bridge, I discovered, with a throb of wonder, the 2 men whom I had seen in my dream walking one behind the other and advancing towards me. Instinctively I fell at the feet of the one whom I believed to be the Prophet and devoutly kissed them. I begged him and his companion to mount the horses which I had prepared for their entry into MÁH-KÚ. "Nay," was his reply, "I have vowed to accomplish the whole of my journey on foot. I will walk to the summit of this mountain and will there visit your prisoner." This strange experience of Ali Khan brought about a deepening of reverence in his attitude towards the Bab. His faith in the potency of his revelation became even greater, and his devotion to him was vastly increased. In an attitude of humble surrender, he followed Mullah Hussein until they reached the gate of the castle. As soon as the eyes of Mullah Hussein fell upon the countenance of his master, who was seen standing at the threshold of the gate, he halted instantly, and bowing low before him, stood motionless by his side. The Bab stretched forth his arms and affectionately embraced him. Taking him by the hand, he conducted him to his chamber. He then summoned his friends into his presence and celebrated in their company the feast of Nowruz. Dishes of sweetmeats and of the choicest fruits had been spread before him. He distributed them among his assembled friends, and as he offered some of the quinces and apples to Mullah Hussein, he said, "These luscious fruits have come to us from Milan, the Ard-i-Janat, and have been specially plucked and consecrated to this feast by Ismullahul Fatik, Muhammad Taqi." A footnote says of Ard-i-Janat, literally the land of paradise. Until that time, no one of the disciples of the Bab, but Sayyid Hussein Yazdi and his brother, had been allowed to spend the night within the castle. That day, Ali Khan went to the Bab and said, "If it be your desire to retain Mullah Hussein with you this night, I am ready to abide by your wish, for I have no will of my own. However long you desire him to stay with you, I pledge myself to carry out your command." The disciples of the Bab continued to arrive in increasing numbers at MÁH-KÚ, and were immediately and without the least restriction admitted to his presence. One day, as the Bab, in the company of Mullah Hussein, was looking out over the landscape of the surrounding country from the roof of the castle, he gazed towards the west, and, as he saw the Araxes winding its course far away below him, turned to Mullah Hussein and said, "That is the river, and this is the bank thereof, of which the poet Hafiz has thus written, O Zephyr, shouldst thou pass by the banks of the Araxes, and plant a kiss on the earth of that valley, and make fragrant thy breath. Hail, 1,000 times hail to thee, O abode of Salma! How dear is the voice of thy camel drivers, how sweet the jingling of thy bells! The days of your stay in this country are approaching their end, but for the shortness of your stay we would have shown you the abode of Salma, even as we have revealed to your eyes the banks of the Araxes. By the abode of Salma, the Bab meant the town of Salmaz, which is situated in the neighborhood of Shirik, and which the Turks designate as Salmaz. Continuing his remarks, the Bab said, "It is the immediate influence of the Holy Spirit that causes words such as these to stream from the tongues of poets, the significance of which they themselves are oftentimes unable to apprehend. The following verse is also divinely inspired. Shiraz will be thrown into a tumult, a youth of sugar tongue will appear. I fear lest the breath of his mouth should agitate and upset Baghdad." The mystery enshrined within this verse is now concealed. It will be revealed in the year after Hin. The Bab subsequently quoted this well-known tradition. Treasures lie hidden beneath the throne of God. The key to those treasures is the tongue of poets. He then, one after the other, related to Mullah Hussain those events which must need transpire in the future, and bade him not to mention them to anyone. A footnote here says, in the Dala'il-i-Sabi, the Bab reveals the following. The Hadith Azerbaijan, referring to this matter, says, "The things which will appear in Azerbaijan are necessary for us. Nothing can prevent their occurrence. Remain therefore in your homes, but if you hear that an agitator has appeared, then hasten towards him." And the Hadith continues, saying, "Woe to the Arabs, for the civil war is near." If in speaking these last words the Prophet had intended to refer to his own mission, his statement would have been vain and worthless. From the Books of Seven Proofs, translated by A.L.M. Nicholas, page 47. A few days after your departure from this place, the Bab informed him, they will transfer us to another mountain. Ere you arrive at your destination, the news of our departure from MÁH-KÚ will have reached you. The prediction which the Bab had uttered was promptly fulfilled. Those who had been charged to watch secretly the movements and conduct of Ali Khan submitted to Haji Mirza Akazi a detailed report in which they expatiated upon his extreme devotion to his prisoner and described such incidents as tended to confirm their statements. Day and night, they wrote him, the warden of the castle of MÁH-KÚ is to be seen associating with his captives in conditions of unrestrained freedom and friendliness. Ali Khan, who obstinately refused to wed his daughter with the heir to the throne of Persia, pleading that such an act would so infuriate the Sunni relatives of his mother that they would unhesitatingly put him and his daughter to death, now with the keenest eagerness desires that same daughter to be espoused of the Bab. The latter has refused, but Ali Khan still persists in his entreaty. But for the prisoner's refusal, the nuptials of the maiden would have been already celebrated. Ali Khan had actually made such a request, and had even begged Mullah Hussain to intercede in his behalf with the Bab, but had failed to obtain his consent. These malevolent reports had an immediate influence upon Haji Mirza Akazi. Fear and resentment again impelled that capricious minister to issue a peremptory order for the transference of the Bab to the castle of Shirik. 20 days after Nowruz, the Bab bade farewell to the people of MÁH-KÚ, who, in the course of his 9 months' captivity, had recognized to a remarkable degree the power of his personality and the greatness of his character. Mullah Hussain, who had already, at the bidding of the Bab, departed from MÁH-KÚ, was still in Tabriz, when the news of his master's predicted transference to Shirik reached him. As the Bab bade his last farewell to Mullah Hussain, he addressed him in these words, "You have walked on foot all the way from your native province to this place. On foot you must likewise return until you reach your destination. For your days of horsemanship are yet to come. You are destined to exhibit such courage, such skill and heroism as shall eclipse the mightiest deeds of the heroes of old. Your daring exploits will win the praise and admiration of the dwellers in the eternal kingdom. You should visit on your way the believers of Kui, of Urumiyyi, of Maraghi, of Milan, of Tabriz, of Zanjan and Qazvin, and of Tehran." To each you will convey the expression of my love and tender affection. You will strive to inflame their hearts anew with the fire of the love of the beauty of God. You will endeavor to fortify their faith in his revelation. From Tehran, you should proceed to Mazindaran, where God's hidden treasure will be made manifest to you. You will be called upon to perform deeds so great as will dwarf the mightiest achievements of the past. The nature of your task will in that place be revealed to you, and strength and guidance will be bestowed upon you that you may be fitted to render your service to his cause.
So as you see, even the plans of Mirza Aghasi, the prime minister, actually didn't work out too well, because even the warden, which was a Sunni, offered his daughter for marriage to Bab. So,
But he refused to give the daughter to Shah.
no, right, the Shah's son. What? No, the Shah's son is the governor of Azerbaijan, which included everything. So this was the eldest son. Yeah, of course. This was the eldest son that was supposed to become king later on. So it was a very, and.
But he refused to give his daughter because.
Well, he mentions here to the Shah's son, because they were Sunnis, and right. So then they said it would be, and they were making these political marriages all the time, at the time. So he wanted to create unity, so it would be less skirmishes in that area, but he refused, and then he offered his daughter to Bab. Of course. And then because of that, Mirza Aghasi banished Bab from MÁH-KÚ to Chehri, which was further out. It was another castle. Which,
Just because it was insulted, or?
no, he wanted, obviously Bab established his presence in MÁH-KÚ, and no one was against him. So even the warden was helping him and providing services for him and allowing him to meet his followers without any restrictions. So he wanted to make. Sorry? Yeah. So this was. But the interesting thing is that it shows that Bab was aware of Baha'u'llah, although they never seen each other. And he was mentioning that. You're going to meet an important person in Mazindaran, where Baha'u'llah was.
But
And
did the Bab win over those people?
that's right. So the whole process was, because he was a Sayyid, he was Shiite in double force, and he was a descendant of the Muhammad, and Sunnis despise Imams and descendants of Muhammad is actually described. So he thought that this would be the best place to contain him, and making sure that even the warden was basically married. His mother was Sunni, and so he thought that this area would be encapsulating him, where actually reverse occurred. That people that were Sunnis were gravitated to him, and even the warden changed his tune and became a servant of him, basically. So that was the whole story regarding the propagation of the spiritual force that exists in manifestations. So wherever they go, the people that were order to harm them or contain them would really fall into their realm.
And even today, though, the Kurds are the target of so much of the hatred in the Middle East over in that area.
No, they have, yeah, remember, yeah, they have their own aspiration of being one country. See, right now, and this is a cultural aspects of their.
So even back then, they were stuck.
Oh, of course, this thing has been there thousands of years. This is before even Islam. These were people that were living in that area, and they think that's their own land, which it is.
Yeah. So then that's
So-
more of a cultural thing rather than a religious war that's going on.
No, the religious war was there as well, because again, during the Safavid dynasty, these Shiites didn't exist, or it was a minute minority as far as people that followed imams or descendant of Muhammad. So majority of Iran or Islamic countries, majority by 19 some percentage, were actually Sunnis. So what ended up happening is that to basically solidify the political system, Safavid dynasties that were Turks actually also, they were Turks themselves. They actually brought in this obscure religion to defend the territory against the Ottoman Empire. So when you looked at the Kurds were right in the middle of it. It's between the Ottoman Empire and basically Iran, which was Shiites. And during Safavid dynasty and even Qajar dynasty, Qajar was so corrupt and dilapidated and powerless that they lost a lot of territories. But during Safavid dynasty, they actually purged. They did religious cleansing. They got rid of all the Sunnis, Christians, and they massacred a lot of people just to segregate and force Shia doctrine in Iran. So they were actually a post in the northeastern side. And even Azerbaijan, one of the major reasons the Turks in today's Azerbaijan, which is in Russia right now, they were mostly Sunnis actually. So half of it is on Iranian side, half is on Russian side. But the idiots, mullahs during the Qajar dynasty arose and say, look, these guys are infidel, let's attack. And they didn't have any heart. Let's attack Russia and from Azerbaijan. And then Russian came down and took half of Azerbaijan. Right. So it's amazing what kind of incompetency existed during Qajar dynasty. Oh, this is not. When you mix religion with politics, this is what happens. His history would show you not to do that.
On the morning of the 9th day after Nowruz, Mullah Hussain set forth, as bidden by his master, on his journey to Mazindaran. To Kambar Ali, the Bab addressed these parting words. The Kambar Ali of a bygone age would glory in that his namesake has lived to witness a day for which even he, that is a reference to Muhammad, who was the Lord of his Lord, sighed in vain, of which he, with keen longing, has spoken, would that my eyes could behold the faces of my brethren who have been privileged to attain unto his day. Chapter 14. Mullah Hussain's journey to Mazindaran. Ali Khan cordially invited Mullah Hussain to tarry a few days in his home before his departure from MÁH-KÚ. He expressed a keen desire to provide every facility for his journey to Mazindaran. The latter, however, refused to delay his departure or to avail himself of the means of comfort which Ali Khan had so devotedly placed at his disposal. He, faithful to the instructions he had received, stopped at every town and village that the Bab had directed him to visit, gathered the faithful, conveyed to them the love, the greetings, and the assurances of their beloved master, quickened afresh their zeal, and exhorted them to remain steadfast in his way. In Tehran, it was again privileged to enter the presence of Baha'u'llah, and to receive from his hands that spiritual sustenance which enabled him with such undaunted courage to brave the perils that so fiercely assailed the closing days of his life. From Tehran, Mullah Hussain proceeded to Mazindaran in eager expectation of witnessing the revelation of the hidden treasure promised to him by his master. Qudus was at that time living in Bafurush, in the home which had originally belonged to his own father. He freely associated with all classes of people, and by the gentleness of his character and the wide range of his learning had won the affection and unqualified admiration of the inhabitants of that town. Upon his arrival in that city, Mullah Hussain went directly to the home of Qudus and was affectionately received by him. Qudus himself waited upon his guest and did his utmost to provide whatever seemed necessary for his comfort. With his own hands he removed the dust and washed the blistered skin of his feet. He offered him the seat of honor in the company of his assembled friends, and introduced with extreme reverence each of the believers who had gathered to meet him. On the night of his arrival, as soon as the believers who had been invited to dinner to meet Mullah Hussain had returned to their homes, the host, turning to his guest, inquired whether he would enlighten him more particularly regarding his intimate experiences with the Bab in the castle of MÁH-KÚ. "Many and diverse," replied Mullah Hussain, "were the things which I heard and witnessed in the course of my 9 days' association with him. He spoke to me of things relating both directly and indirectly to his faith. He gave me, however, no definite directions as to the course I should pursue for the propagation of his cause. All he told me was this: on your way to Tehran, you should visit the believers in every town and village through which you pass. From Tehran, you should proceed to Mazindaran, for there lies a hidden treasure, which will be revealed to you, a treasure which will unveil to your eyes the character of the task you are destined to perform." By his allusions, I could, however, dimly perceive the glory of his revelation, and was able to discern the signs of the future ascendancy of his cause. From his words I gathered that I should eventually be called upon to sacrifice my unworthy self in his path, for on previous occasions, whenever dismissing me from his presence, the Bab would invariably assure me that I should again be summoned to meet him. This time, however, as he spoke to me his parting words, he gave me no such promise, nor did he allude to the possibility of my ever meeting him again face to face in this world. "The feast of sacrifice," were his last words to me, "is fast approaching. Arise and gird up the loin of endeavor, and let nothing detain you from achieving your destiny. Having attained your destination, prepare yourself to receive us, for we too shall ere long follow you." Qudus inquired whether he had brought with him any of his master's writings, and on being informed that he had none with him, presented his guest with the pages of a manuscript which he had in his possession, and requested him to read certain of its passages. As soon as he had read a page of that manuscript, his countenance underwent a sudden and complete change. His features betrayed an undefinable expression of admiration and surprise. The loftiness, the profundity, above all, the penetrating influence of the words he had read, provoked intense agitation in his heart, and called forth the utmost praise from his lips. Laying down the manuscript, he said, "I can well realize that the author of these words has drawn his inspiration from that fountainhead which stands immeasurably superior to the sources whence the learning of men is ordinarily derived. I hereby testify to my wholehearted recognition of the sublimity of these words, and to my unquestioned acceptance of the truth which they reveal." From the silence which Qudus observed, as well as from the expression which his countenance betokened, Mullah Hussain concluded that no one else except his host could have penned those words. He instantly arose from his seat, and standing with bowed head at the threshold of the door, reverently declared, "The hidden treasure of which the Bab has spoken now lies unveiled before my eyes. Its light has dispelled the gloom of perplexity and doubt. though my master be now hidden amid the mountain fastnesses of Azerbaijan, the sign of his splendor and the revelation of his might stand manifest before me. I have found in Mazindaran the reflection of his glory. How grave, how appalling the mistake of Haji Mirza Akasi. This foolish minister had vainly imagined that by condemning the Bab to a life of hopeless exile in a remote and sequestered corner of Azerbaijan, he would succeed in concealing from the eyes of his countrymen that flame of God's undying fire. Little did he perceive that by setting up the light of God upon a hill, he was helping to diffuse its radiance and to proclaim its glory. By his own acts, by his amazing miscalculations, instead of hiding that heavenly flame from the eyes of men, he gave it still further prominence and helped to excite its glow. How fair, on the other hand, was Mullah Hussain, and how keen and sure his judgment. Of those who had known and seen him, none could for one moment question the erudition of this youth, his charm, his high integrity, and amazing courage. Had he, after the death of Sayyid Qasim, declared himself the promised Qaim, the most distinguished among his fellow disciples would have unanimously acknowledged his claim and submitted to his authority. Had not Mullah Muhammad-i Mamakani, that noted and learned disciple of Sheikh Ahmad-i Asai, after he was made acquainted in Tabriz by Mullah Hussain with the claims of the new revelation, declared, "I take God as my witness, had this claim which the Sayyid-i Bab has made been advanced by this same Mullah Hussain, I would, in view of his remarkable traits of character and breadth of knowledge, have been the first to champion his cause, and to proclaim it to all people. As he, however, has chosen to subordinate himself to another person, I have ceased to have any confidence in his words, and have refused to respond to his appeal." Had not Sayyid Muhammad Baqir-i Rashdi, when he heard Mullah Hussain so ably resolve the perplexities which had long afflicted his mind, testified in such glowing terms to his high attainments, I, who fondly imagined myself capable of confounding and silencing Sayyid Qasim-i Rashdi, realized, when I first met and conversed with him, who claims to be only his humble disciple, how grievously I erred in my judgment. Such is the strength with which this youth seems endowed, that if he were to declare the day to be night, I would still believe him able to deduce such proofs as would conclusively demonstrate, in the eyes of the learned divines, the truth of his statement. On the very night he was brought in contact with the Bab, Mullah Hussain, though at first conscious of his own infinite superiority and predisposed to belittle the claims advanced by the son of an obscure merchant in Shiraz, did not fail to perceive, as soon as his host had begun to unfold his theme, the incalculable benefits latent in his revelation. He eagerly embraced his cause, and disdainfully abandoned whatever might hamper his own efforts for the proper understanding and the effective promotion of its interests. And when, in due course, Mullah Hussain was given the opportunity of appreciating the transcendent sublimity of the writings of Qudus, he, with his usual sagacity and unerring judgment, was likewise able to estimate the true worth and merit of those special gifts with which both the person and the utterance of Qudus were endowed. The vastness of his own acquired knowledge dwindled into insignificance before the all-encompassing, the God-given virtues which the spirit of this youth displayed. That very moment he pledged his undying loyalty to him who so powerfully mirrored forth the radiance of his own beloved master. He felt it to be his first obligation to subordinate himself entirely to Qudus, to follow in his footsteps, to abide by his will, and to ensure by every means in his power his welfare and safety. Until the hour of his martyrdom, Mullah Hussain remained faithful to his pledge. In the extreme deference which he henceforth showed to Qudus, he was solely actuated by a firm and unalterable conviction of the reality of those supernatural gifts which so clearly distinguished him from the rest of his fellow disciples. No other consideration induced him to show such deference and humility in his behavior towards one who seemed to be but his equal. Mullah Hussain's keen insight swiftly apprehended the magnitude of the power that lay latent in him, and and the nobility of his character impelled him to demonstrate befittingly his recognition of that truth. Such was the transformation wrought in the attitude of Mullah Hussain towards Qudus that the believers who gathered the next morning at his house were extremely surprised to find that the guest who the night before had occupied the seat of honor, and upon whom had been lavished such kindness and hospitality, had given his seat to his host, and was now standing in his place at the threshold in an attitude of complete humility. The first words which, in the company of the assembled believers, Qudus addressed to Mullah Hussain were the following: "Now, at this very hour, you shall arise, and, armed with a rod of wisdom and of might, silence the host of evil plotters who strive to discredit the fair name of the faith of God. You should face that multitude and confound their forces. You should place your reliance upon the grace of God, and should regard their machinations as a futile attempt to obscure the radiance of the cause. You should interview the Sayyidul Ulama, that notorious and false-hearted tyrant, and should fearlessly disclose to his eyes the distinguishing features of this revelation. From thence you should proceed to Khorasan. In the town of Mashhad you should build a house so designed as both to serve for our private residence and at the same time afford adequate facilities for the reception of our guests. Thither we shall shortly journey, and in that house we shall dwell. To it you shall invite every receptive soul who we hope may be guided to the river of everlasting life. We shall prepare and admonish them to band themselves together and proclaim the cause of God." Mullah Hussain set out the next day at the hour of sunrise to interview the Sayyidul Ulama. Alone and unaided, he sought his presence and conveyed to him, as bidden by Qudus, the message of the new day. With fearlessness and eloquence he pleaded, in the midst of the assembled disciples, the cause of his beloved master, called upon him to demolish those idols which his own idle fancy had carved, and to plant upon their shattered fragments the standards of divine guidance. He appealed to him to disentangle his mind from the fettering creeds of the past, and to hasten free and untrammeled to the shores of eternal salvation. With characteristic vigor he defeated every argument with which that specious sorcerer sought to refute the truth of the divine message, and exposed by means of his unanswerable logic the fallacies of every doctrine that he endeavored to propound. Assailed by the fear lest the congregation of his disciples should unanimously rally round the person of Mullah Hussain, the Sayyidul Ulama had recourse to the meanest of devices, and indulged in the most abusive language in the hope of safeguarding the integrity of his position. He hurled his calumnies into the face of Mullah Hussain, and contemptuously ignoring the proofs and testimonies adduced by his opponent, confidently asserted, without the least justification on his part, the futility of the cause he had been summoned to embrace. No sooner had Mullah Hussain realized his utter incapacity to apprehend the significance of the message he had brought him, than he arose from his seat and said, "My argument has failed to rouse you from your sleep of negligence. My deeds will, in the days to come, prove to you the power of the message you have chosen to despise." He spoke with such vehemence and emotion that Sayyidul Ulama was utterly confounded. Such was the consternation of his soul that he was unable to reply. Mullah Hussain then turned to a member of that audience who seemed to have felt the influence of his words, and charged him to relate to Qudus the circumstances of this interview. "Say to him," he added, "inasmuch as you did not specifically command me to seek your presence, I have determined to set out immediately for Khorasan. I proceed to carry out in their entirety those things which you have instructed me to perform." Alone and with a heart wholly detached from all else but God, Mullah Hussain set out on his journey to Mashhad. His only companion as he trod his way to Khorasan was the thought of accomplishing faithfully the wishes of Qudus, and his one sustenance the consciousness of his unfailing promise. He went directly to the home of Mirza Muhammad Baqir Kaini, and was soon able to buy in the neighborhood of that house, in Bala-Kiaban, a tract of land on which he began to erect the house which he had been commanded to build, and to which he gave the name of Bab'i, a name that it bears to the present day. Shortly after it was completed, Qudus arrived at Mashhad, and abode in that house. A steady stream of visitors whom the energy and zeal of Mullah Hussain had prepared for the acceptance of the faith poured into the presence of Qudus, acknowledged the claim of the cause, and willingly enlisted under its banner. The all-observing vigilance with which Mullah Hussain labored to diffuse the knowledge of the new revelation, and the masterly manner in which Qudus edified its ever-increasing adherents, gave rise to a wave of enthusiasm which swept over the entire city of Mashhad, and the effects of which spread rapidly beyond the confines of Khorasan. The house of Bab'i was soon converted into a rallying centre for a multitude of devotees who were fired with an inflexible resolve to demonstrate, by every means in their power, the great inherent energies of their faith.